Friends, before we start this story, remember one thing. Sometimes in life, things happen that are hard to believe, but when they unfold right before your eyes, your perspective changes forever. After hearing this story, you'll find yourself saying, "Yes, this really can happen." Now, let's begin. Trapped in a cruel circle. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the narrow alley into a maze of puddles and mud. A girl, no older than 15, stood with her back against a damp brick wall, her hands clutching the straps of her worn-out backpack. She had walked home this way 100 times before, but tonight was different. The footsteps behind her weren't just passing strangers. They were familiar, and they were closing in. She had always been quiet, always kept to herself. At school, she sat alone at lunch, not because she wanted to, but because it was easier. Avoiding people meant avoiding trouble. But no matter how much she stayed invisible, they still saw her. The bullies always did. Tonight, they had found her alone, far from the safety of the school gates. A cruel laugh echoed behind her. "Where do you think you're going, freak?" one of them sneered. The others chuckled, their voices blending with the sound of the rain. There were 4 of them, 3 boys and a girl, all older, stronger, and used to getting what they wanted. They had tormented her for months, stealing her things, knocking her books to the ground, whispering insults in her ear when teachers weren't looking. She took a step forward, trying to ignore them, but one of the boys grabbed her arm. "Not so fast," he said, his fingers tightening. "We just want to talk." Her heart pounded as she yanked her arm free. "Leave me alone," she said, but her voice was barely louder than a whisper. They laughed again. The tallest boy, their leader, blocked her path. "What's the rush?" he said. "We're all friends here." She knew how this would go. They would taunt her, maybe push her around, take whatever money she had. The teachers never did anything. The principal had told her to try harder to fit in. There was no one to help her. No one who cared. A sharp shove sent her stumbling backward. She hit the wall, pain shooting through her shoulder. The girl in the group stepped forward, eyes glinting with cruelty. "Why do you always act like you're better than us?" she spat. "You think you're special?" "I never said that," she whispered. Another shove. Liar. The rain made it harder to breathe. She looked around, searching for anyone, any sign of help. But the street was empty. The houses had their lights off. No one would hear her scream, and even if they did, they wouldn't come. The tallest boy cracked his knuckles. "You never fight back. That's why it's so fun." She braced herself. There was no escape. And then, out of nowhere, a deep, guttural growl cut through the night. The bullies froze. A shadow moved at the end of the alley, just beyond the streetlight's reach. It was massive, bigger than any dog she had ever seen. The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the light caught its shape. Thick, muscular, covered in dark fur. Its golden eyes locked onto the group with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. It wasn't just a dog. It was a wolf. The leader took a step back, suddenly unsure. "What the hell?" The wolf let out another low growl, ears flat against its head. It wasn't scared. It wasn't uncertain. It was here for her. Her heart raced. She had never seen a wolf in real life, let alone in the middle of town. And yet, somehow, she wasn't afraid of it. It was watching her, studying her, like it knew her, like it had been waiting. The bullies exchanged nervous glances. "Let's get out of here," one of the boys muttered. But the leader hesitated, trying to act tough. "It's just a dog." The wolf lunged. Not at them, just forward, just enough to send a message. Its powerful body hit the pavement with a force that made the ground tremble. Its teeth flashed, sharp and white, its growl turning into something deeper, more dangerous. That was all it took. The bullies ran. They didn't look back. The girl stood frozen, staring at the wolf as it turned toward her. It didn't move closer. It didn't bare its teeth. It just watched. She swallowed hard. Did you just save me?" The wolf blinked. Then, as if satisfied, it turned and disappeared into the darkness. She didn't know where it had come from. She didn't know if she'd ever see it again. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. A silent guardian. The next morning, the girl sat at the farthest table in the school cafeteria, staring blankly at her untouched lunch. The events of the previous night played over and over in her mind. The wolf, the way it had appeared, as if out of nowhere. The way it had stood between her and the bullies, unafraid, unwavering. It wasn't normal. Wolves didn't live in town. And yet, it had been there. And it had saved her. She glanced around the room. The bullies were there, sitting at their usual table. But something had changed. They were quieter. Their eyes flicked toward her every few minutes, but none of them sneered or laughed. It was as if they were pretending she didn't exist. For the first time in months, they left her alone. But that didn't mean she felt safe. After school, she walked home with her head down, hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket. The streets were still damp from the rain, the air crisp with the lingering scent of wet pavement. Every step she took felt heavier, like something was pressing down on her chest. She told herself it was over. The bullies wouldn't come after her again, not after what had happened. But deep down, she knew fear made people unpredictable. If they weren't tormenting her, it was only because they were planning something worse. As she neared her street, a strange feeling crept over her, like she was being watched. She slowed down, glancing over her shoulder. The sidewalk was empty. The houses were quiet. Everything looked normal. But the feeling didn't go away. She took a deep breath and walked faster. Her house was only a few blocks away. Then she saw it. Standing near the edge of a vacant lot, half hidden by the shadows of a tall oak tree, was the wolf. Her breath caught. It wasn't moving. It just stood there, golden eyes locked onto her, watching. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world around them faded. The sound of distant traffic, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was just her and the wolf. Then, slowly, she took a step forward. "You." Her voice barely broke the silence. "You're following me." The wolf didn't react. It didn't growl, didn't run. It simply watched. She wasn't sure what she was expecting. A response? A sign? Something to prove she wasn't losing her mind. Another step. "Why did you help me?" Still, nothing. Then, just as she was about to take another step, the wolf turned and disappeared into the trees. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It didn't make sense. Wolves weren't pets. They didn't follow people. But this one had. And somehow, she didn't feel afraid. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way the wolf had looked at her. There was something in its eyes, something familiar, like it knew her, like it had been protecting her long before she even realized it was there. And then, just before sleep took her, a thought surfaced in her mind. What if it wasn't just a wolf? The truth in the shadows. The following days passed in a strange blur. The bullies kept their distance. No one whispered behind her back. No one tripped her in the hallway. No one snatched her backpack or called her names. It was as if she had become invisible again. But this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't being ignored out of cruelty. She was being avoided. But she still felt watched. Every time she walked home, she felt the weight of unseen eyes. Every time she turned a corner, she sensed a presence just beyond her vision. She knew it wasn't paranoia. The wolf was still there. Then, on the third night, she saw it again. She had taken a different route home, hoping to clear her mind. But when she stepped onto her street, the wolf was waiting. Not in the shadows, not hidden behind trees. It stood in the open, right at the edge of her driveway, as if it had been expecting her. This time, she didn't hesitate. She approached slowly, her heart pounding. The wolf didn't move. Its golden eyes held hers, steady and knowing. There was something about it, something ancient, something powerful, something that made her feel small but safe at the same time. She stopped a few feet away. "You've been following me." It wasn't a question. It was the truth. The wolf blinked. She swallowed hard. Why? For the first time, the wolf moved. It stepped forward, closing the distance between them, its massive frame looming over her. And then, something incredible happened. It bowed its head. A rush of cold air brushed against her skin, though there was no wind. The world around her seemed to slow. She felt a pull, something deep inside her, something that whispered of memories she didn't have, of promises she didn't remember making. Her breath came in shallow gasps. "Who? What are you?" The wolf lifted its head, and for the briefest moment, something flickered in its eyes, something human. Then, before she could move, it turned and sprinted into the night. She stood frozen, the weight of an unspoken truth settling in her chest. This wasn't just a wolf. It never had been. And deep down, she knew. This wasn't the last time she would see it. Conclusion: a guardian in the dark. The world was filled with things people didn't understand. Some called them legends, myths, or coincidences. But sometimes, the truth walked beside them, unseen yet always there. She didn't know why the wolf had chosen her. She didn't know where it had come from or why it had protected her. But she knew one thing. She was no longer alone, and she never would be again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, we are being watched over, even when we feel completely alone.